Welcome to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
Okay, so then I wanna hear more about global trade. This is something, and even let's get into relations with China, although the topics can be separate. We were talking about this. Oh, I don't know. It's probably several Saturdays back now, right? My wife was out of town. You were over at the campfire.
Yeah.
Um, so global trade, a country that sends goods out, of course, that's exporting. When you bring goods into your country, that's importing. Countries may want to be involved in this if, for example, we're making wine efficiently here in America, but our sweaters are not so efficient. But another country, I don't know what other country would make sweaters. Let's just say Brazil. They make sweaters super efficiently, but wine maybe not so much. And so we want to just be like the wine guy and they're the sweater guy and we trade, and that's just better for everybody because we can make it more efficiently here. They can make sweaters more efficient. Now we're trading. Like that's why you would do global trade.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's about specialization. Works when neighbors next to each other specialize. I make milk, you make cheese. I buy the milk from you, I make cheese. So you can specialize in making milk. I specialize in making cheese or whatever. Or I could be making, I could be growing cows while you're growing something else. It works the same way with countries, and sometimes uh, you know, geography and resources dictate certain strengths and weaknesses, even the finance. So, for example, it doesn't make sense for farmers in northern England to try to make wine to sell to southern France, and for the southern France to try to raise sheep for wool and
Yes.
sell it to northern England where it's abundant sheep. So you specialize in what you're good at and you import what you're not. That's how it's supposed to work. And first of all, again, back up a second. Globalization and trade are very good for all humans. As a matter of fact, it's really bought standard of living. uh, any country that's involved in trade and what have you. I mean, even countries that are not known to be capitalists, whatever, exporting oil out of Saudi Arabia changed the lives of Arab countries.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, exporting out of China has uplifted the lives of many Chinese. There's about 1 billion Chinese, but 300 million of them, roughly about the same number of American people, live lives like you and I. They're considered middle class to upper class. I mean, they're really there is a 300 million Americans, sorry, Chinese in China are living very similar lives to the 300 million Americans living in America, but they have 600 million. They're still, you know, well below, the poverty line. Now we have that problem too, but it's not as big a percentage.
Mm-hmm.
So exporting brings up everybody. You have productivity, so you have efficiency, and then people get paid, so then they can afford to buy things, and they start to buy toothpaste and toothbrush, and they start buying, more prepared food, and so on and so forth. And then next thing you know, they're consuming cars and so on and so forth. And it just goes on and on. So consumption grows, and therefore, more demand grows, and so on forth. That's how it's supposed to work.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, you only need two things for this. You need capital and labor. And you take the capital, and how do you get capital? Capital is saved. So somebody's saving, somebody's capital, and you apply it to labor by educating it and building factories and training it, and then you have output. And that's basically how you create GDP.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the problem that we have today um, is that for about 300 years prior to about 1950, the problem that existed throughout the world was actually shortage. Right? You had shortages of everything. You've heard famines. You've heard. I mean, the Bolshevik Revolution was about the government taking land from the farmer. You go everywhere. Socialism is essentially, basically about taking everything and putting it in the hands of central control, so that the central power can control the production and who gets the wheat and who gets the grain and so on and so forth. So we had a history, roughly 300 years, 250 years of shortages. Um, and then all of a sudden, that just completely changed. So we have the opposite problem. We have in multitude, and that's both capital and production. We have more capital than we know what to do with. That's why Apple assets keep getting invested up, and Chinese are saving, Americans are saving, investments are going up, and so we have plenty of capital and we have plenty of productivity. So wait a minute, so one of the arguments you hear out there is if they just invest more and we'll have more, but in order to invest, you have to have a consumer. And right now, the problem facing the world is consumption. We are able to produce more than we can consume.
Hmm.
And so what does that mean? So this problem, even though it started in 1950, really became very clear in the 1970s. And because we just didn't have enough uh, demand for what we were doing to continue to grow. So we started to lever the economy so people can consume more than they can afford. So borrow from future demand to spend today, which kind of creates only so much you can do with that. But apparently we can keep going. I don't know when it ends, but
Yeah.
Um, and then countries around the world started to rely on export as a way to solve it. And this works out really well if you're an exporter, like Germany, for example. Since 1999, this has worked out really well for Germany. Cheap currency. Once they entered the EU, the Deutsche Mark strength was gone, so they had cheap currency, so they could continue to export, and their currency stayed for. See, in the real world, if it was you and I trading, you had your currency and I had my currency, and you specialized in X and I specialized in Z, and we traded. If you were beating me at trade, meaning that I am buying from you more than you are selling to me, which essentially means I am borrowing money. My banks are creating debt, or somehow, in order to balance my books, I'm borrowing. Okay, so if that's the case, then what would happen is your currency value would go up and my currency would go down.
If let me just pause you for 1 second. If you and I are different countries and I'm selling you more than I'm buying from you, if I'm selling you more than I'm buying from you, my currency is going to go up
In value,
in value and yours is going to go down.
because you're accumulating my money and I'm having to go borrow more.
Yes, I see. Okay.
Okay. And so this is how it's supposed to work. And unfortunately, people say, "Oh, it's a free system." It's not a free system. The countries are controlling their currency. So by Germany, for example,
Just pull
entering
that mic close to you.
by Germany entering the EU, they were able to keep their currency cheaper than it would be otherwise. Okay, so they can continue to sell their product, right?
Mm.
Same way with China. China can be, keep its currency low. They manage their currency so that they can continue to sell at cheap prices. At some point, it's supposed to reverse, but that doesn't happen uh, when you're controlling the currency valuation. Now, there's other reason it doesn't happen, which is that, of course, their standard of living is also they have a lot more to go. That's another factor. Um, Another factor that affects it too is that they make investments for the sole purpose of creating jobs, which essentially means displacing jobs from the West to their country so that they can feed their 1 billion people. They still need to have more jobs. They have people moving from the countryside to the cities seeking jobs. So this creates a lot of imbalances, and people suffer from it. This is understood. It's not a secret. It's not a theory. It's not being debated. You have winners and losers in this, and even the most pro uh, uh, free traders will tell you that you have winners and losers, and you have to kind of see how you're going to solve these problems. And typically, they throw things around like job retraining and whatever, whatever, what have you. Um, but ultimately, um, after years of globalization and trade, um, people have figured it out and starting to push back. Okay, and this is kind of, I think, surprised the political party throughout the Western world, because they were sort of trying to argue for free trade or so-called globalization, but it was hurting a lot of people from financially. Americans are saving a lot of money, but it's the rich that are saving, and they're accumulating investment assets. But the average household is not really making much more money than they did in the '70s in real terms when you adjust for inflation. So 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 this can't go on forever, and people
Mm.
woke up to it, and you had kind of a, so now the problem is, what's the solution? The solution, diagnosing the problem is much easier than actually applying a solution, because protectionism is not in itself a solution, because if you apply protectionism as your strategy to deal with it, um, eventually you become uncompetitive with your own products.
Yes.
Okay, so that doesn't work. Um, so so trading partners is one way that could possibly solve that. So we've sort of doubled down on the North American free trade thing, and possibly they were looking at some others with Eastern, some Asian countries, but it's a challenge, because uh, there's no inflation. I mean, if you look around, only areas that you're actually experiencing inflation in the United States are things that the government subsidized or the government controls the supply of, like education, housing. Those are two areas that, you know, healthcare. All three are going up, experiencing inflation. Everything else is not.
Mm.
You don't see inflation. You see quite the opposite.
Hmm.
So I don't know what the solutions are, but what has to happen, whatever the solution is, I don't know, but the end result has to be that more people have higher wages, so that less is being saved by the few and more is being consumed.
Yep.
Because the people that make 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200,000 a year, they consume most of their money. They spend it. People that make 10 times that don't consume much more, relatively speaking.
Hmm.
So we need more consumption, okay? But then wait a minute, we're supposed to be trying to save the planet. How are we going to have more consumption if we're going to save the planet?
Yep.
So you got these conundrums going
Well,
on,
isn't that when you go find an emerging market in some third world country and start selling to them?
Well, I mean, they don't consume that much, and especially not the more expensive products. So what has happened is China has found the United States. They want to
Right.
sell to them,
Yeah.
and the Fords of the world have to compete. So they outsource some product and make some product here, and you have. But I think in long term, what you're saying, I think, would hopefully be the goal, and that Africa would be a great growing continent with middle class, and they would consume. But again, we just went through that with China, and they're not consuming anywhere near what they're selling.
I see.
So it's not a matter of degree, as long as you are selling me more stuff and not consuming my stuff, we have a problem,
Hmm.
you know. Um, and eventually, somebody's gonna say, "Wait a minute, this is not a fair game. We're gonna end it." And that's, I think, what the world is getting to. But there's a lot of relationships that rely on this trade. So you have Germany is uh, it does a lot of exporting to China. So they don't want to stand up to China. So they weren't going to back the United States in some kind of a, then you have other countries that couldn't care less. So they want to stand up to China because they feel like they're being bullied. Um, and you have other countries that stand to benefit if the United States doesn't trade with China, they will trade with them. So you have all these geopolitics going around it. But at the end of the day, uh, education has gotten prohibitively expensive to Americans. Housing is an issue for many people. Uh, I don't know if I could afford to live where I live. If I had to buy my house today in Nashville, I'd have to live outside the county, I think, or live in a much smaller place.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought my house just less than 20 years ago. Less than 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So can you imagine what it's like for the average Nashvilleian to find housing?
Yeah.
And even in this environment,
Yep.
we're in the middle of a pandemic. Uh, so it's challenging. So yeah, education, housing, healthcare has become a big issue because, quite frankly, healthcare is a simple issue in America. It costs $6,000 roughly per person per year to have good healthcare insurance. And if you have that kind of policy, it doesn't go up a lot in price every year. The insurance company negotiates rates and so on and so forth. So the problem is to be able to afford a $6,000 policy, you need to be making. I mean, even if you're making 24,000, that's a very high percentage.
Yeah.
You
It
can't
doesn't work.
afford that.
Yep.
Can you imagine how much you have to make then if you have 3 kids?
Yep.
Dear God,
Yep.
I mean that's just so it's very challenging, and so the politicians are making promises and these grandiose things like as if it's going to appear magically. But what we're really talking about is, do we pay for it through deficit spending? Go in the hole to pay for it's generally not a good idea to pay for things that don't have that you're going to consume with dollars 10 years from.
Yes.
It's not a bad idea to buy a house that you're going to live in that's going to appreciate in value. That's a good asset to do that. But when you pay a doctor for a procedure and the procedure is done, it's worthless. There's no value for it anymore.
Yep.
So are we going to really do deficit spending to pay for that? Doesn't seem like a wise decision.
Mm.
But then, everybody wants to make promises and so on, but maybe the real problem is the jobs that would come with a decent insurance that you only have to pay 20-30% of, and the employer would pay 75 or so percent, whatever, and it's affordable because you're making good money.
Yes. Yeah.